All right, Brainiacs. It is Miss Murray here with a stuffy nose, and I'm going to tell you about the spectacularly terrifying Spartans. So Sparta is located in a part of Greece called the Peloponnesus in the southern kind of peninsula. And remember, a peninsula is an area of water, an area of land surrounded by water on three sides. We want to remember about Sparta. Sparta was not on the coast, it was inland. It was about 27 miles inland. They did have some territory on the water, for the most part, that they were landlocked. And the area that they were part of was called Laconia or Lacedaemon. Um, and the people that were there prior to the beginning, prior to what we call the Spartans, um, they came in and they conquered the area, and Laconia or Lacedaemon is that area that they took over. Um, so this is kind of what it looks like. This is a settlement here that you could see. Sparta is kind of cool because it's located on a river, which is awesome because we remember from our studies, right? Living by a river gives you really fertile land, so you can grow food, and the soil is really has lots of nutrients. The other awesome thing about Sparta, while it was inland, right? If you see these mountains, it was surrounded by hills and mountains on three sides, basically. So it made it really good, because it was really easy to protect because getting over mountains is really hard. Um, and then it's difficult to invade. Now, the downside of that is that they were also lonely, right? Because um, the mountains and that are surrounding them, and then to a certain extent, and in some ways, the river, right, isolate them. So they're not as innovative. They don't come up with advances in architecture and art and government and theater like the Athenians do, because the Athenians are located on the coast, right? They were trading. They were very much more interactive with other city states. And as a result, Sparta has a really strong army and not so much a strong navy, which brings them problems later on. So they're isolated, and that really helps them, and kind of allows them to develop in the way that they did into a really unique culture. Um, so their land was really rich in iron ore, and iron ore is a mineral that you get from mining. People still mine for iron. Actually, some of the places where the Spartans mined for iron ore were in operation until the 1950s and 1960s for thousands of years. Um, Iron ore was used to make weapons. So when you think about Sparta, think about weapons and the strong military and iron ore. And they grew by invading and capturing neighboring city states. Like I said, they were super militaristic. Uh, Society, right? So they definitely are going to go and on the offensive and invade and capture other city states to get the things that they need. This is an example. This is a visual of one of the mining. They're mining for iron ore. So if you see, they're down here, and then they're in these buckets here. They're bringing up the mineral. It's like a sand kind of. And this is what they would make. This is like they have the shields and the different weapons, and had the shields on their head as well, the helmets, that would be made from iron ore. And these are some other weapons that we'll talk about in a second. Um, Another thing that byproduct of being isolated is that they were suspicious of new ideas and foreigners, and had a reputation for being laconic, which is using as few words as necessary when they're speaking. So, for instance, um, a neighboring community from Macedonia, which is north of Sparta, one of the leaders said, like, listen, if I conquer Sparta, you're all dead. You're done. And Sparta responded by saying, if. So that's an example, like they would have one or two word answers for something. It was like, get to the point already. So they're very few words. They just get right to the point. They tended to be poorer than other Greeks and did little with science and arts. That's a byproduct, like I said, of the being isolated and not having advances in technology and innovations. Um, but their athletes usually dominated at the Olympic Games, right? Because their whole society, the number one thing, the most important thing is that you be loyal to the state and the kind of this, like, physical strength and military strength. And everything we know about of Sparta comes from accounts written by non-Spartans. So they're not kind of a group like the Athenians who are recording down their history and writing down what's going on and who are the important people. Everything we know is from somebody else, not from a Spartan. So as a from a historical perspective, it'd be interesting to think about if we had an account from an actual Spartan. But they were too busy being awesome, strengthening themselves for the military. So we're going to watch this short video.
In ancient Greece, violent internal conflict between border neighbors and war with foreign invaders was a way of life, and Greeks were considered premier warriors. Most Greek city-states surrounded themselves with massive defensive walls for added protection. Sparta, in its prime, was a different story, finding walls unnecessary when it had an army of the most feared warriors in the ancient world. So what was Sparta doing differently than everyone else to produce such fierce soldiers? To answer that question, we turn to the written accounts of that time. There are no surviving written accounts from Spartans themselves, as it was forbidden for Spartans to keep records. So we have to rely on those of non-Spartan ancient historians, like Herodotus, Thucydides, and Plutarch. These stories may be embellished and depict Sparta at the apex of its power, so take them with a grain of salt. For Spartans, the purpose for their existence was simple: to serve Sparta. On the day of their birth, elder Spartan leaders examined every newborn. The strong, healthy babies were considered capable of fulfilling this purpose, and the others may have been left on Mount Taygetus to die. Every Spartan, boy or girl, was expected to be physically strong, mentally sharp, and emotionally resilient, and it was their absolute duty to defend and promote Sparta at all costs. So in the first years of their lives, children were raised to understand that their loyalty belonged first to Sparta, and then to family. This mindset probably made it easier for the Spartan boys, who upon turning 7 were sent to the Agoge, a place with one main purpose: to turn a boy into a Spartan warrior through 13 years of relentless, harsh, and often brutal training. The Spartans prized physical perfection above all else, and so the students spent a great deal of their time learning how to fight. To ensure resilience in battle, boys were encouraged to fight among themselves, and bullying, unlike today, was acceptable. In order to better prepare the boys for the conditions of war, the boys were poorly fed, sometimes even going days without eating. They also were given little in the way of clothing, so that they could learn to deal with different temperatures. Spartan boys were encouraged to steal in order to survive, but if they were caught, they would be disciplined, not because they stole, but because they were caught in the act. During the annual contest of endurance in a religious ritual known as the Diamastigosis, teenage boys were whipped in front of an altar at the sanctuary of Artemis Orthia. It was common for boys to die on the altar of the goddess. Fortunately, not everything was as brutal as that. Young Spartans were also taught how to read, write, and dance, which taught them graceful control of their movements and helped them in combat. While the responsibilities for the girls of Sparta were different, the high standards of excellence and expectation to serve Sparta with their lives remained the same. Spartan girls lived at home with their mothers as they attended school. Their curriculum included the arts, music, dance, reading, and writing. And to stay in peak physical condition, they learned a variety of sports, such as discus, javelin, and horseback riding. In Sparta, it was believed that only strong and capable women could bear children that would one day become strong and capable warriors. To all Spartans, men and women, perhaps the most important lesson from Spartan school was allegiance to Sparta. To die for their city-state was seen as the completion of one's duty to Sparta. Upon their death, only men who died in battle and women who died in childbirth were given tombstones. In the eyes of their countrymen, both died so that Sparta could live.
All right, folks. All right, so back to the PowerPoint. All right, so who lived in Sparta? So you have, I am a Spartan, a full citizen with rights. My parents were Spartan citizens. I can own land, and since I am male, I have full political rights. Spartans make up the smallest proportion of people living in Sparta. So what's ironic is that a full citizen, the number of people who were citizens was the smallest group. So most people were not citizens in ancient Sparta. All right, the Perioeci. I was made by a Perioeci. This was a free person living in Sparta who was usually an artisan or merchant. Even though they are free, they are not a citizen. They have no political rights. All right, a helot I belong to a helot. Helots are slaves who live and work on Spartan farms. They cannot own property and can never rise in status to become a citizen. During war times, they are forced to fight in the Spartan army. There are a lot more helots than Spartans, and sometimes the Spartans reduce their numbers by purging or killing them. All right, so basically, the role of the helot was a slave in ancient Sparta. They are doing all of the stuff in the background to support the military state. So they are working for soldiers and tending land and growing food so that the society can function. They are doing everything. They are cleaning, they are cooking, they are building things. They are doing all of the really, really hard work that makes the entire society function, right? So that when they are training men to become soldiers and to be kind of part of the military state, all right, these are the people that are doing the work. All right. The Spartans were greatly outnumbered by the Helots and the Perioeci. In 650 BC, the Helots and the Perioeci revolted. It took 30 years for the Spartans to suppress their revolt. Another interesting fact is, like, if there was some type of uprising or a revolt and the men were off at war, the women were expected to step up and suppress and end the revolt. Determined to prevent future rebellions, Sparta became a highly trained military society and maintained tight control over Helots and the Perioeci for the next 250 years. All right. Sparta looked down upon cities that relied on walls for protection. Remember, Sparta is surrounded on three sides by mountains or hills, and then they have a river. So they were kind of spoiled, but it's kind of rude that they're like, hey, you need a wall, you're a jerk. But anyway, so they looked down on cities that relied on walls for protection, like Athens. Spartan hoplites, which are infantry soldiers, wore a red cloak and had the lambda Greek letter L on their shields. To remain strong, Spartan officials examined infants of citizens, and unhealthy or weak infants were left to die, or they were left to become helots, which are the kind of Spartan slaves. What's interesting about the helots, who were the Spartan slaves, that a lot of them retained some type of normalcy in terms of their home life. A lot of times that there were families who had children who were helots, and who, they would, a man and a woman would have a child, and their child would become a Spartan slave. But like, those kind of behaviors weren't necessarily encouraged in other aspects of Spartan culture. So that's a visual of what a Spartan hoplite would look like. All right, and I'm going to play this video that just gives you a little overview of kind of what a Spartan warrior would look like and what it would be. It's a little cute cartoon.
The Spartan Hoplite. The Spartan hoplite was one of the most feared and dangerous warriors of ancient Greece. A Spartan soldier would have to endure an intense training program in the agoge from a young age. Many did not survive the training. These boys often had to steal for food and were punished if they were caught. Boys reached adulthood at 18 and joined the military force at 20. The Spartan's most important weapon was his shield. This was typically the aspis hoplite shield. On the aspis, Spartans would often paint the letter lambda, which was the first letter in the name of the Spartan homeland, Laconia. The Spartan shield was so important to a Spartan that losing it would be considered a disgraceful act. Spartans were originally armed with bronze cuirasses, leg greaves, and a helmet, often of the Corinthian design. Later, Spartans adopted the line of thorax, although the bronze cuirass remained popular. As well as this, the Spartans also adopted a new tunic, which could be arranged so that the left arm and shoulder were uncovered and free for action in combat. The Spartans' main offensive weapon was a 2.4 to 4.5 meter long spear called doru. This was held in the right hand, with the left hand holding the Spartan's shield. The Spartan also carried a javelin and a sword called a xiphos, which was a short stabbing sword. In battle, the Spartan would normally fight in a phalanx formation. This was a close formation where each shield overlapped to provide as much protection as possible. In battle, the opposing forces would push against each other using their shields until the other side broke. However, the Spartan phalanx would be steamrolled by the updated Theban phalanx, which was far deeper than the standard phalanx, and thus was able to push harder. Thank you for watching and listening. All sources are listed in link.
All right. Hopefully they give you kind of a nice overview of Spartan weaponry and uniforms. All right, so let's talk about gender and male and female citizens. At the age of 7, boys were taken from their homes and placed in military barracks where they learned to read, write, and use weapons. Prior to the age of 7, boys are living in the home with their mothers or with a nurse. Nurses and mothers were not encouraged to coddle or to kind of overly comfort the babies and the children. What you want to remember is that children are not looked at as being possessions of their parents. They're kind of looked at belonging to the state, not a family. If you can think about that, like for instance, today people have like you belong to your family. Well, in Sparta, you belong to the state. You belong to Sparta, not your mother or father. Fathers really did not have direct roles in the lives of their children, and mothers really only did until the age of 7. And after the age of 7, women had a lot more freedom. At the age of 20, males became soldiers, and they were sent to defend frontier areas. At that time, they have a citizenship test, which includes like physical, but both reading and writing. If they pass, they become a full citizen and can enjoy all the benefits of that, become, a full, soldier. If they fail, a lot of times what would happen is that they would become part of the perioeci, which was kind of the middle class that we touched upon, who weren't citizens, but were craftsmen or artisans and who made things in Sparta. They live in the barracks most of their lives until about the age of 60. Sometimes men, I read in some accounts, would at the age of 30 marry and then live in homes, but you want to think men and women don't really have children or get married out of love. It's more of out of service to the state and about the idea of procreating and creating more healthy and strong children for Sparta. when men were 20, just to go back for a second, they would be given a plot of land and hillets to who were the slaves to work the lands to generate an income so that these soldiers could continue to be soldiers and not have to have other jobs. So in a lot of ways, like you became a citizen when you were a man based on merit, because you had to pass a test, and if you didn't pass the test, then you would not get your citizenship. Um, so female citizens, on the other hand, so girls live it with a nurse or a mother until the age of 7, very similar to boys. Girls were trained in gymnastics, wrestling, boxing. They were taught to read and write. They married around the age of 19, which is a lot later than in the city-state of Athens that we just studied. In Athens, they get married much earlier, and a result them of women being married later is that they're more mature, their bodies are stronger, and the idea was that if you have strong mothers, you have strong babies. And similar to boys, they had to pass a citizenship test when they were 18 or 19 years old, and then from there they are able to become like I wouldn't say they don't become full citizens, but they would have to pass kind of a test to show their skills. So they're married at the age of 19. They had more personal rights and freedoms than other women in city states, like owning property and expressing opinions, but they couldn't participate in government. However, they could um, own land and they did have a level of freedom because remember, after the age of 7, their children are taken away and are seen as possessions of the state and aren't living in their homes. They're not having to take care of them. And the fact that, children were taken away from their families from the age of 7 and up, coddling children or over comforting children was seen as like being, the influence of a mother was seen as really negative after a certain age in Sparta, and they thought it was detrimental to the strength of the state. Um, uh, and, children are taught kind of these brave stories of courage and fortitude, and they're not kind of taught really anything but of loyalty to the state and military service. There's an interesting story called The Boy Who Followed the Spartan Code, which is about a young boy who was encouraged to, young Spartan boys were encouraged to forage and to steal to get food. And this young Spartan boy had went and found a fox, and he was trying to capture the fox, and he was approached by other Spartan, older Spartan military leaders. And he, if he got caught with the fox, he was going to, get in trouble. So he hid the fox under his cloak. And what happened is the fox started to bite him and basically eat his stomach while he was being questioned by the Spartan military leader. And the boy ended up dying, but did not at any point show that he was being attacked by this fox that he was hiding, because you would get severely, physically punished, and people would look down on you if you got caught stealing. And the last thing is women could become very, very wealthy. All right, government. So there were 2 hereditary kings, which hereditary is a word that means that power was passed on from father to son, and it's called the diarchy. It's kind of like Spartan government is kind of a blend of like democracy, oligarchy, and a monarchy, which is kings. Ruled jointly over the military and served as the priests of Zeus. If they went to war, the kings would go to war. The other component is called the assembly, and it's made up of all male citizens over the age of 20. They met about once a month to pass laws and make decisions about war and peace. And they voted by shouting, which seems stressful to me, but it seems as though they were able to get things done. The 5 of Fours, they were overseers, so basically they supervised the government. and even to a certain extent supervise the king. They were chosen by the assembly each year. They're chosen by a lot. All eligible citizens had an equal chance to be chosen, and they had the power to veto or I forbid legislation. So if a law was passed to the assembly, the one of the five and fours could veto it and say no, that can't happen. And they served for 1 year and then weren't eligible to serve again as supervisors. All right, and the Council of Elders, really interesting group, 28 men over the age of 60, so kind of older individuals in the community who had went through military service, proposed laws to the assembly and served as the highest court in trying crimes or in evaluating laws and punishments, and they held the position for life. Like I said, you had to be over 60. There were 28 of them. The kings, the two kings, the hereditary kings, were part of the Council of Elders. That was kind of one of their roles. And what I thought was really interesting about the Council of Elders is that they didn't have to follow the laws. So they could basically do whatever they wanted. All right, so peak and decline of Sparta. Sparta's civilization peaked at 500 BC. In 371 BC, so a little more than 200 years later, Sparta lost the Battle of Leuctra against Thebes, it was another city-state, and never again regained their glory. In in 147 BC, Sparta became a free city within the Roman Empire. And in 396 AD, the Visigoths sacked Sparta, and many of the Spartans were sold into slavery. All right, thank you for watching. Hopefully you learned a bunch.